In April of 2016, a woman in southeastern Ohio was cleaning out her dead father's hunting camp when she found a coffee can sitting on a shelf above the wood stove. The can was full of the things men keep: nails, washers, 2 rifle cartridges, a church key, and underneath all of it, a black plastic canister holding a roll of 35mm film that had never been developed. Her father had died that January at 81, and the camp on Bloomfield Ridge had been his for 40 years. Charmaine Hupp Reese almost threw that can into the contractor bag with everything else. She said later she could not tell you why she did not. 11 days after that, she dropped the roll off at a photo counter in Zanesville, mostly out of curiosity, mostly expecting deer. And that is what the first 22 frames were: deer at a salt lick, the front end of an old Ford, a camp stove with a percolator sitting on it. Frame 23 was a garage floor, concrete stained dark with decades of oil, a cracked drain grate near the center, and laid out on that floor, arranged almost carefully, a cranberry red hooded sweatshirt with 2 words across the chest in white block letters: Ridgemont Panthers. Behind it, on the wall, a Quaker State calendar turned to October of 1992. Frame 24 was a girl's face, half in shadow, looking up at the camera, alive. Charmaine Hupp Reese knew that face. Every person in Calder County over the age of 40 did, because it had been taped in the window of every business in Ridgemont for a decade, printed in the county paper every October for 24 years, and carried on a poster board at the head of a candlelight procession every autumn since 1993. Katie Ann Boyd was 17 years old. On the 9th of October 1992, she walked out of a homecoming bonfire at the Calder County Fairgrounds and started home along 8/10 of a mile of gravel called Quarry Road. She never got there. No struggle, no scream, no blood, no shoes. 14 houses stood along that road, and not one person in any of them heard a single sound. Search dogs, helicopters from 2 counties, 400 volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder through soybean stubble in a cold rain. Nothing. Katie Ann Boyd evaporated off 8/10 of a mile of gravel in a town where everybody knew everybody. For 24 years, this county had a story it told itself about what happened to that girl. They had a man they blamed. They said his name in the grocery store with their voices lowered. They ran him out of Ridgemont, and they were certain, and they were wrong. Because when the sheriff's office finally traced that roll of film back to the garage it had been taken in, the address was not the one the whole county had spent a quarter century pointing at. It was 1 2/10 of a mile in the opposite direction, and the man arrested at that address in June of 2016 was not a stranger, and not a drifter, and not the man everybody suspected. He was the man who had organized the search. He drew the grids. He ran the phone tree. He carried the coffee urn out to the volunteers at dawn. He stood beside Katie's mother at every vigil for 24 years. And he was the man who found her necklace lying on the shoulder of Quarry Road, 3 days after she disappeared. Before we continue with this shocking story, subscribe and hit the bell. Don't miss any case. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to know where our community is. Now let's go back to how all of this started. Ridgemont, Ohio sits on a bend of the Muskingum River in the southeastern corner of the state, where the flat farm country gives up and folds itself into hills. In 1992, the population was 4,127. It was the seat of Calder County, which meant it had a courthouse with a green copper roof, a 2-story brick high school, a hardware store, a pharmacy with a soda counter that had been there since 1951, and a glass plant out on the state route that everybody knew was closing, and nobody said out loud. Strangers got noticed in Ridgemont. That is the thing about a town like this, and it is the thing that made what happened so impossible for anyone there to accept. Strangers got noticed, neighbors did not. The Boyds lived at the west end of Quarry Road in a 2-bedroom house with aluminum siding the color of oatmeal and a walnut tree in the side yard that dropped hulls all over the driveway every fall. Ray Boyd was 42. He drove a gravel truck for the Calder County Road Department and had for 19 years. He was a big, slow-moving man with permanent grit in the creases of his knuckles, the kind of father who did not say much and did not need to, who showed up to every softball game and stood at the fence by himself down the third base line because he could not sit still in the bleachers. Louise Boyd was 39. She worked the pressing line at Calder Glass Works, second shift when she could get it, because second shift paid $1.10 more an hour. She had her mother's hands and her mother's stubbornness, and both of those things would matter more than anyone could have guessed. Danny Boyd was 11. He was small for his age, obsessed with the fire department scanner his grandmother had given him, and he followed his sister around the house asking questions until she threatened to sit on him. And Katie Ann Boyd was 17. She was a senior at Ridgemont High, 5'4". Honey brown hair she wore pulled back because she never had the patience for anything else. She had a chipped front tooth from a softball that took a bad hop off the infield lip in the 9th grade, and she was self-conscious about it for exactly one summer before she decided she liked it. She played left field. She was not the best player on the team, and she knew it, and she showed up early anyway. She worked Saturdays at the soda counter at Delber's Pharmacy, 6 hours for $31, and she saved almost all of it in a Folgers can in her closet because she wanted to go to the 2-year veterinary technician program at the community college in Zanesville. She had the brochure. She had circled the tuition figure in blue pen and written a number underneath it that she was counting toward. She had a mustard seed necklace, a thin gold chain with a tiny glass sphere on it, given to her by her grandmother Ruth at her confirmation when she was 13. The idea being faith the size of a mustard seed. She wore it every single day. She wore it in the shower. Her mother used to tell her the chain would give out. This is the part that people always want to skip past, and it is the part that matters most. Katie Boyd was not remarkable. She was not troubled or secretive or running from anything. She was a good, ordinary 17-year-old girl in a good, ordinary family in a town of 4,000 people, and every single one of them believed that was the same thing as being safe. Friday, the 9th of October, 1992. It was the first real cold of the season, 41 degrees at sundown, dropping toward 36. It had rained hard on Thursday, and the river was up, and by evening, the fog was already coming off the water and pooling in the low fields along the state route. Homecoming week at Ridgemont High. The bonfire at the Calder County Fairgrounds was a tradition older than anyone attending it. A pile of pallets and busted furniture stacked 12 feet high in the middle of the harness racing track, lit at 6:30 by whoever the seniors elected. Katie ate dinner at home that night. Hamburger steak, green beans, applesauce. Louise remembered it because she remembered everything about that day afterward, every ordinary fragment of it polished smooth from being handled so many times. Katie and her father had argued the night before. It was nothing. It was about curfew and a car ride and whether she was going to Wade Tillery's cousin's place after the bonfire, and Ray had said no, and Katie had said fine in the tone that meant it was not fine, and she had gone to her room. That was Thursday. By Friday at supper it was over, the way it is in most families. She asked him to pass the applesauce. He asked her if the Panthers were going to get beat on Saturday. She said probably. That was the last full conversation Ray Boyd ever had with his daughter, and he would spend the next 17 years turning it over, looking for something in it, and finding nothing but applesauce and a football game. She left the house at 6:10. Danny watched her go from the front window. She was wearing a cranberry red hooded sweatshirt with Ridgemont Panthers across the chest in white block letters, the one she had bought at the school store in September with soda counter money. Faded Levi's. White Keds with a hole worn clean through the canvas over the left big toe, which her mother had been after her to replace for 2 months. The black plastic digital watch she wore on her right wrist, and the mustard seed necklace. Trina Ostrander picked her up. They got to the fairgrounds around 20 till 7. What happened at that bonfire over the next 3 hours became one of the most documented ordinary evenings in Ohio history. Within 72 hours, investigators interviewed 161 people who were there. They found nothing. Katie Boyd stood by the fire. She ate a hot dog. She talked to her softball coach about whether she should try out for spring or get more hours at the pharmacy instead. She laughed at somebody's brother falling off the fence rail. She got cold and put her hood up. She was photographed twice, in the background of other people's pictures, and in both photographs, she is just a girl in a red sweatshirt looking at a fire. Wade Tillery was there. He was 24, worked at the quarry, and he and Katie had been together, and not together, and together again since the spring. They talked for maybe 15 minutes near the concession stand. 4 witnesses saw it. Nobody described it as an argument. He left at around 9:10 with 2 men he worked with. Multiple people watched him go. At around 9:35, Katie told Trina she was going to head home. Trina offered to drive her. Katie said no. It was 0.8 of a mile. She had walked it 100 times, in the dark, in the rain, in the snow. It was Ridgemont. They hugged. Trina went back toward the fire. At approximately 9:40 at night, Katie Ann Boyd walked out through the fairgrounds gate, turned left onto Quarry Road, and stepped into the fog. Nobody who loved her ever saw her again. 8/10 of a mile. Investigators would later time the walk at 14 minutes, at a comfortable pace. 11. If you were cold and moving. Quarry Road left the fairgrounds gate, ran flat past the old fairboard barn, bent right at a culvert, climbed a slow grade past a soybean field that had been cut the week before, bent left again, and then straightened out past 14 houses to the Boyd place at the west end. No streetlights, no sidewalk, gravel shoulders, ditch on both sides, a fence line of locust and multiflora rows. At 9:47, a man named Elton Mazie was driving an empty hauler back to the yard on the state route and turned up Quarry Road because it cut 2 miles off his run. In his headlights, just past the culvert at the second bend, he passed a girl in a red hooded sweatshirt walking on the left shoulder facing traffic, the way you are taught to. Hood up, hands in the front pocket. He did not slow down. He had no reason to. That was the last confirmed sighting of Katie Ann Boyd. Elton Mazie was in the yard 4.5 minutes later. He came forward the next day, voluntarily, and he passed a polygraph, and he told that story exactly the same way for the rest of his life. He also told his wife, more than once, that he wished to God he had stopped and offered her a ride. Between the second bend and the Boyd driveway there is 4/10 of a mile. That is the entire mystery. 4/10 of a mile of gravel road with 14 occupied houses along it on a Friday night at 9:45. Nobody heard a scream. Nobody heard brakes. Nobody heard a horn or a shout or a car door. 2 of those 14 houses had dogs that barked at everything, and both dogs were quiet. No blood on the gravel, no fabric in the fence line, no footprints leaving the shoulder, no tire impressions in either ditch, no cigarette butts, no bottle caps, no dropped keys, no shoes, no sweatshirt, no purse, because she had not carried one, no body, no trace, no sound at all. Louise Boyd started looking at the clock at about 10 o'clock. Katie's curfew on a Friday was 11, so there was no reason to worry. And Louise worried anyway, the way mothers do, without being able to say why. At 10:15, she called the Ostranders. Trina had just gotten home. Trina said Katie had left the fairgrounds to walk. Louise said walk where? Trina said home. Louise sent Ray out at 10:30. He drove Quarry Road to the fairgrounds and back with the high beams on. He did it again with the window down, calling out the window. He drove it a third time at 11 o'clock, slower, stopping at the culvert, getting out, standing in the fog with the truck idling behind him. At 20 minutes past midnight, on the 10th of October, Ray and Louise Boyd stood at the counter of the Calder County Sheriff's Office and reported their 17-year-old daughter missing. The deputy on duty asked whether she had a boyfriend. He asked whether she had been fighting with her parents. He asked whether she might have run off, and Louise said no, and the deputy wrote it down, and Louise watched him write it down and understood, in that moment, that he did not believe her. If you have ever had to convince a stranger in a uniform that your child would not simply leave, that you know your own flesh and blood, that something is wrong right now and every minute matters, then you already know the specific helplessness the Boyds felt standing at that counter at midnight. It would be 24 years before anybody in Calder County said the words that mattered out loud. By 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, the Ridgemont Volunteer Fire Department had opened its bay doors and turned the station into a command post, and the man standing in the middle of it with a county plat map spread across the hood of a brush truck was the fire chief. Everett Cawley. Everybody called him Ev. He was 47 years old. He owned Cawley and Son Towing out on Bickle Hollow Road, a 2-bay garage with a gravel yard behind it full of wrecks, and he had been chief of the volunteer department for 11 years by then, and would be for 20 more. If you had a wreck on the state route at 2 in the morning in Calder County, Ev Cawley came. If your barn burned, Ev Cawley came. He had cut a man free of a combine. He knew every gate, every ford, every logging trace, every abandoned wellhead in that county, because pulling vehicles out of them had been his living for 25 years. Nobody in Ridgemont had to be asked twice to trust Ev Cawley. He was the person you called when the worst thing had already happened. He drew the grids himself. He divided the county map into numbered sections, assigned team captains, and logged every volunteer in a spiral notebook. He organized the phone tree. He hauled a coffee urn out to the fairgrounds at dawn on the 10th of October and set it on the tailgate of his own truck. And he did the same thing the next morning, and the morning after that. 406 people searched for Katie Boyd that first weekend. Farmers walked their own fields. The high school football team searched the creek bottom in their practice jerseys. 2 helicopters flew the ridges. Divers went into the quarry ponds. Dogs worked the road and lost the scent at the second bend, near the culvert, which told everyone that she had gotten into a vehicle. They found nothing. Nothing on Saturday, nothing on Sunday. And then on Monday, the 12th of October, at around 4 in the afternoon, walking the east shoulder of Quarry Road for the 4th time in 3 days, Eve Cawley found the necklace. A thin gold chain with a tiny glass sphere on it, lying in the gravel and dead grass of the ditch line, about 140 feet east of the culvert. He did not touch it. He called it in on his own radio, marked it with an orange flag, stood over it, and kept everyone back until the deputies came. Louise Boyd was at the fire station when the call came across, and she was in a cruiser on Quarry Road 8 minutes later, and she identified it before she was all the way out of the car. She had bought the chain herself in 1988 to replace the one Ruth had given Katie, because the original had been too short. Here is the detail that sat in an evidence envelope for 24 years and meant nothing to anybody. The clasp was intact. The spring ring was closed. The chain was not broken, not stretched, not damaged in any way. In 1992, one deputy wrote a single line about it in a supplemental report, and no one ever followed it up, because the necklace answered a question everybody was desperate to have answered. It told them which direction she had gone: east, toward the culvert, toward the river, toward the state route, and away from town. Every grid, every dive team, every dog, every helicopter pass, every excavation for the next 24 years worked east from that spot. Cawley and Son Towing was 1 2/10 of a mile west. A town cannot live inside a question. It will take an answer, any answer, over the silence. And in Ridgemont, Ohio in October of 1992, the answer everyone reached for was Wade Tillery. He was 24. He worked the crusher at the Ridgemont quarry. He had a temper that everybody had a story about and nobody had a report about. He had been seeing Katie Boyd since April, on and off, and there were people in that town who had strong opinions about a 24-year-old man and a 17-year-old girl, and those opinions did not need any evidence to become certainty. Detective Curtis Speck brought him in on the 11th of October. He brought him in 10 more times over the following 14 months. Here is what they actually had. Wade Tillery had been at the bonfire and had talked to Katie for 15 minutes. He left at around 9:10 with 2 co-workers, who confirmed it, and who dropped him at his mother's house at approximately 20 till 10. After that, his only alibi was his mother, Verna Tillery, and a mother is not an alibi. He agreed to a polygraph in November. He passed every question on it except one. The question was whether he knew where Katie Boyd was. The examiner marked it inconclusive, with a note about elevated response. Inconclusive. That word left the sheriff's office as a rumor and arrived at the Ridgemont IGA as a fact. By Thanksgiving of 1992, the story in that county was that Wade Tillery had failed a lie detector test. He was never charged. There was never enough to charge him with, because there was never anything at all. But the county did not need a jury. His hours got cut at the quarry, then his shifts, then his job. His fiancée gave the ring back in January. Somebody put a brick through the back window of his truck. Somebody spray-painted one word on the side of his mother's garage, and Verna Tillery painted over it, and 2 weeks later somebody did it again. Kids yelled things at him from car windows on the state route. He stayed 6 years. In 1998, he moved to Kentucky and worked at a lumber yard and drank more than he should have and did not come back, not for Christmas, not for his father's funeral. He died in 2010 at 42 years old of liver failure in a hospital in Ashland. He never heard anybody say the words, "not him." While that was happening, the county had a second story it liked better, because it was easier. The Calder County Fair had struck its tents 4 days before Katie disappeared, and the carnival cruise had rolled out toward Marietta on the Monday. That fact grew in the retelling until half of Ridgemont was sure that a carnival truck had still been sitting on the fairgrounds on Friday night, which no record supports and no witness ever confirmed. The name attached to the theory was Sonny Pryor, a ride operator with a record in 2 states and a face that fit what people wanted to imagine. Detectives chased him for 9 years. He was interviewed twice, in Indiana and in Tennessee. He never placed himself within 80 miles of Ridgemont. In 2001, he was found dead in a rented room in Missouri, and a full review of his employment records and fuel receipts excluded him completely. That theory served a purpose. and the purpose was comfort. If the man who took Katie Boyd came in with the carnival and left with the carnival, then Ridgemont was still Ridgemont. The danger had come from outside and gone back outside. Every October for 24 years, people in that town stood at a candlelight vigil and held that belief and warmed their hands on it. And every October for 24 years, the man who lit the first candle was standing right there with them. There was a third theory, and the Boyds did not learn about it until 1994. In the spring of 1993, with Wade Tillery uncharged and the carnival lead going nowhere, Detective Curtis Speck did what investigators are trained to do when a case will not open. He turned around and looked at the family. He learned about the argument on Thursday night, the one about curfew and a car ride. He learned that Ray Boyd had told a deputy he came home from the VFW at 9 o'clock on Friday and had told a neighbor, in passing, that he came home at 9:30. He learned that Ray drove Quarry Road 3 separate times on the night his daughter vanished, alone, in a truck, before calling anyone. For 11 months, without telling them, the Calder County Sheriff's Office quietly investigated Ray Boyd. They pulled his route logs from the county garage. They interviewed his coworkers about his temper and his drinking. They interviewed the VFW bartender twice. They ran his gravel truck through the state lab for hair and fiber in August of 1993, on a Tuesday, while Ray was at work and thought the truck was in for inspection. They found nothing, because there was nothing. He was cleared in February of 1994. He found out about it in April, from a reporter, in his own driveway. Something in Ray Boyd went out that day and did not come back on. He never spoke to Curtis Speck again. He stopped attending the searches. He would not go to the vigils. Louise went alone, every year, for the rest of his life. People in Ridgemont noticed that the father did not come, and Ridgemont being Ridgemont, some of them drew the obvious conclusion, and Ray Boyd carried the weight of that for 17 more years. If you have ever lost someone and then had to defend yourself for losing them, you know that particular crushing weight. It is a second wound laid directly over an open wound, and it does not close. That is the day the tragedy split their lives in two, and this is what limbo actually looks like. Not the searchlights, the years afterward. Louise kept the bedroom, not as a shrine, she always insisted, just as a room. The Folgers can stayed in the closet with $218 in it. The veterinary technician brochure stayed on the desk with the tuition figure circled in blue pen. Louise washed the sheets on that bed every spring and every fall for 24 years, and folded them, and put them back on. She watched the flyers in the store windows go yellow and curl at the corners, watched the tape give out, watched herself put up new ones, watched the county paper move the anniversary story from the front page to page 3, and then to page 7, and then to a paragraph, watched people stop asking, watched people cross the street at the IGA because they did not know what to say to her anymore. Watched Danny grow past his sister's height, then past her age, then past it by 10 years, then by 15. Watched 24 Octobers. There is a name for what the Boyds were living in, and it is ambiguous loss. It is the specific torture of grief that is never allowed to finish. You cannot bury someone you have not found. You cannot hope for someone you cannot picture. You wake up every morning and reset the same two impossible thoughts side by side, that she is out there and needs you, and that she has been gone a very long time. Louise Boyd did the only thing she could do with that. She turned it into endurance. She wrote the sheriff's office a letter every year on the 9th of October, and she kept a copy of every one, and by 2016 there were 23 of them in a shoebox. Nobody ever answered a single one of them. Twice in those 24 years, hope came back, and both times it came back cruelly. In November of 1994, an inmate at a correctional institution in southern Ohio named Cordell Beaumont told a corrections officer he wanted to talk about a girl from Calder County. He was serving 11 years on unrelated charges, and he wanted a transfer closer to his mother. He knew things. He knew the red sweatshirt. He knew the necklace. He knew the culvert at the second bend. Investigators believed him for a while, because most of what he said had been in the Zanesville paper in October of 1992, and nobody thought to check. He said she was in the fill at the Dillman strip mine. They dug for 41 days, 2 track hose, a state cadaver team, a refrigerated trailer parked at the gate in case. It was the coldest December in a decade. Louise Boyd stood at that fence line every single one of those 41 days, in a parka, from 7 in the morning until they shut down at dark, because she was not going to have her daughter come up out of the ground with nobody there who loved her. On the 41st day they stopped. Beaumont recanted in March. He had never been to Calder County in his life. Louise Boyd came home shattered. Then, in the summer of 1997, a clerk at a gas station outside Tampa, Florida, called a tip line. A woman had come in, mid-20s, honey brown hair, and she had a chipped front tooth. The clerk had seen the age progression photograph on a television program the week before. There was a security still. It was grainy, and it was black and white, and it was a woman at a counter buying cigarettes. And Louise Boyd looked at a fax of that image on the kitchen table at 2 a.m. and said out loud, "That is my daughter." She and Ray drove 19 hours. They did not sleep. They sat in a parking lot across from that gas station for 2.5 days waiting for a shift to come around. Her name was Amanda. She was 26 years old, from Ocala, and she had chipped her tooth on a diving board when she was 9, and she was very kind about it, and Louise Boyd apologized to her twice, and then went and sat in the car. They drove 19 hours home. Ray did not speak for most of it. "Somewhere in Georgia," Louise said. "That was the last one, wasn't it?" And Ray said, "I don't know." And that was the truest thing either of them said that whole trip. After that, the years just went by. Ruth Boyd died in 1999, still telling people her granddaughter was coming home. Ray Boyd died in March of 2009, at 58, of a heart attack in the cab of a county gravel truck at the top of Bickle Hollow Road, 100 yards from a garage he had driven past every working day of his life. Wade Tillery died in 2010 in a hospital in Ashland, Kentucky, with a county's certainty still stuck to his name. And Danny Boyd, the 11-year-old with the fire scanner, grew up and became a paramedic for Calder County. He joined the Ridgemont Volunteer Fire Department at 19 and served 8 years on it. He rode the same trucks, he drank the same coffee, he stood at the same vigil every October, next to the chief, and the chief would put a hand on his shoulder every single year and say the same thing. "We're not going to quit on your sister, Danny." By 2015, the Katie Boyd file filled 4 boxes in a climate-controlled room in the basement of the Calder County Courthouse, and no active investigator had opened them in 9 years. In the next part, we're going to discover something incredible. A dead man's coffee can, a roll of film that sat undeveloped for 24 years, and a single reflection in a piece of chrome that turned this entire case inside out and pointed it in exactly the opposite direction. If you want to know what happened next, like this video and share it with someone who likes true stories, and subscribe so you don't miss the part where the truth finally comes out. Dale Hupp died on the 19th of January 2016 in a nursing facility in Zanesville. He was 81. 11 people came to the funeral. He had driven a wrecker for most of his adult life, and for a stretch in the late 80s and early 90s, he had driven it for Cawley and Son Towing on Bickle Hollow Road. He was known in Ridgemont as a man who did not talk. Not unfriendly, just closed. He never married. He spent most of his last 30 years at that camp, and people assumed that was just how some men are. In 2002, Dale Hupp had a stroke. In 2009, he was diagnosed with early dementia. Whether he was paralyzed by fear or by something worse, he held it right up until his brain would not hold anything anymore. His daughter, Charmaine Hupp Reese, drove up from Parkersburg in April to clean out the camp so it could be sold. She spent a Saturday and most of a Sunday filling contractor bags. And on that Sunday afternoon, she took down a Maxwell House can from the shelf above the wood stove and shook it, and heard something rattle that was not nails. She kept the film canister in the console of her car for 11 days. She has said since that she does not know why she did not throw it out. She said she just kept looking at it sitting there in the console. The photo counter in Zanesville quoted her $9 and change and told her 3 business days, and mentioned that film that old sometimes comes back as nothing at all. It did not come back as nothing. 22 frames of a life. A doe and 2 yearlings at a salt lick. The grill of a pickup. Somebody's hand holding up a bluegill. A camp stove with an aluminum percolator on it, steam coming off it. And then frame 23. An oil-stained concrete floor, taken from about chest height, the flash catching a cracked iron drain grate at the edge of the frame. A cranberry red hooded sweatshirt spread flat on that floor. White block letters, Ridgemont Panthers. Behind it, at the edge of the light, a Quaker State wall calendar hanging on a stud, turned to October of 1992. And frame 24. A girl's face. Half in shadow, tilted up toward the camera, close enough that the flash burned the color out of one side of it. Her eyes are open. She is looking directly at whoever is holding that camera. It is the most haunting photograph ever entered into evidence in that county. If you have ever seen a photograph of someone in the exact moment their life was being taken away from them, and understood that the person behind the lens chose to take the picture instead of doing anything at all, then you understand what the woman at that counter in Zanesville was holding in her hands. And you understand why she sat in her car in that parking lot for 20 minutes before she could drive. Charmaine Hupp Reese did not call the Calder County Sheriff's Office. She drove to it. She walked in with an envelope of drugstore prints and set them on the counter and said, "I think my father knew something." The photographs went to the cold case desk that same afternoon. That desk belonged to Detective Renata Pike, 34 years old, 4 years into the job, who had grown up 2 counties over and had never once heard the name Katie Boyd. She looked at frame 24 for a long time. Then she went down to the courthouse basement and carried up 4 boxes. Renata Pike had one question, and it was not who took the photograph, it was where. A garage floor is a garage floor. In Calder County, there were probably 400 of them, but frame 23 had been shot with a flash in a dark room, and a flash does something useful. It finds every reflective surface in the frame and lights it up. The prints went to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Agent Hollis Nagy had the negatives scanned at high resolution and enlarged in sections. In the lower left of frame 23, mostly out of focus, sat the chrome housing of a hydraulic floor jack. Curved chrome is a mirror, a bad one, a warped one, but a mirror. And in that curve, small and stretched and backward, was a rectangle of hand-lettered painted board. It took the lab 3 weeks to pull it up and flip it. 3 words, Cawley and Son. Pike drove out Bickle Hollow Road on a Tuesday morning in May of 2016 and parked across from a 2-bay garage with a gravel yard behind it, and she did not get out of the car. She sat there and matched the photograph to the building. The drain grate in the near bay was cracked, in the same place, in the same pattern. The oil staining around it had spread in 24 years, but the shape of it was the shape in the frame. There was a nail still in the stud where a calendar would hang. Then she went back to the 4 boxes and read every page in them, and on the 4th day she found a supplemental report from October of 1992, with one line in it that nobody had ever thought about again. Chain and clasp intact, spring ring closed, no damage noted. Katie Boyd's necklace had not been torn off her neck. It had not caught on anything, or broken in a struggle, or snapped when somebody grabbed her. It had been unhooked, carefully, by somebody's fingers. And then it had been laid in a ditch on the east shoulder of Quarry Road, 140 feet from the culvert, where it would be found, where the search would go. Pike pulled the original evidence log. She pulled the volunteer notebooks from 1992, the spiral ones with the times logged in and out in blue ballpoint. She read the name at the top of every page. The man who drew the grids found the necklace. The man who found the necklace set the direction of the search. The man who set the direction of the search sent 400 people, 2 helicopters, a dive team, and 24 years of investigation east toward the river. His garage was west. There is a kind of hiding that does not require a hole. You do not have to run. You do not have to lie. Exactly. You just have to be the one holding the map. On the 27th of June, 2016, a Calder County judge signed a warrant for the premises at Cawley and Son Towing, Bickle Hollow Road, Ridgemont, Ohio. Nobody told Louise Boyd. Renata Pike would say later that it was the hardest decision she made in the whole case, and that she made it because she had watched a woman get her hopes destroyed at a strip mine fence in 1994, and she was not going to do that to her again for nothing. They came up Bickle Hollow Road at 7 in the morning on the 29th of June, 2016. 2 sheriff's units, a state crime scene van, a bureau team, and a track hoe on a lowboy. Everett Cawley was 71 years old. He came out of the office door in a Ridgemont Fire Department jacket with the chief's insignia on the chest, because he still wore it every day, and he read the warrant standing in his own gravel with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Then he handed it back and said, "All right," and went and sat on the tailgate of a wrecker, and did not say another word for 9 hours. The garage took most of the morning and gave them nothing but a floor that matched a photograph. The yard took the rest of the day. Wrecks stacked 3 high, engine blocks, transmissions, a school bus with a tree growing through it. At 4:15 in the afternoon, along the back fence line under a pile of scrap brake rotors that had to be moved by hand because a magnet would have brought the pile down, they uncovered a millstone. It was an old grinding stone, 4 feet across, the kind that turns up on farms all over that part of Ohio. It was lying flat in the weeds, and it had been there a long time. Underneath it was a dry stone cistern, hand-laid, from a farmhouse that had burned down before Ohio had highway numbers. It took 4 men and a chain to move that stone. What happened after that took 19 days. It was done slowly and carefully, by people who understood that a mother was going to be told about every hour of it. Katie Ann Boyd came up out of that cistern 2/10 of a mile from the road she had been walking home on, 400 yards from where her father died in the cab of a county truck in 2009, and less than a mile from the fire station where 400 people had gathered in the dark to look for her. Everett Cawley was taken into custody at 6:20 that evening. He did not resist. He did not ask what they had found. Renata Pike said in court 2 years later that in 12 years of law enforcement she had never seen a man fail to ask that question. The word went through Ridgemont faster than the sheriff's office could control it. The IGA parking lot filled up. People stood in it and did not know what to do with their hands. Because everybody in that town owed Ev Cawley something. He had cut their kid out of a car on the state route. He had stood in their driveway at 4 a.m. in an ice storm. There were people in Ridgemont, Ohio who were alive because of Ev Cawley, and they found out on the same evening that he had been standing next to Louise Boyd at a candlelight vigil for 24 years. Danny Boyd was 35. He was on shift that day, on a medic unit, and he heard the address come across and he knew that road and he knew that yard. He had ridden fire trucks driven by that man for 8 years. He had eaten chili at that man's table at the department Christmas dinner. He had been 15 years old, standing at his first vigil, when that man put a hand on his shoulder and said, "We're not going to quit on your sister." If you have ever found out that the person who comforted you through the worst thing in your life was the person who caused it, then you already know there is no word in the language for that. It is not betrayal. Betrayal is too small. It reaches back through every year you have already lived and changes what those years were. Danny Boyd drove to his mother's house and told her himself. He would not let a deputy do it. The identification came back in August of 2016. Dental records first, mitochondrial DNA second. Katie Ann Boyd, 17 years old, missing since the 9th of October 1992. In September, the grand jury returned an indictment, and in the same week, the Calder County Sheriff's Office issued a 2-paragraph statement, formally excluding Wade Tillery. Verna Tillery was 84 years old. Louise Boyd drove out to her house and knocked on her door, and those 2 women sat in a front room together for the first time in 24 years and did not say very much. What was there to say? One of them had lost a daughter. The other had lost a son twice, once to a town and once to a hospital in Ashland, Kentucky, and neither of them had ever done a single thing wrong. Katie Boyd was buried in Ridgemont Cemetery on the 9th of October, 2016, 24 years to the day. Her mother chose the date on purpose because she said she was not going to let that date belong to him anymore. The trial was in October of 2018. Everett Cawley was 73. He was convicted of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse, and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He never confessed, he never explained, he never apologized. Given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, he stood up and said 11 words. "I looked for that girl same as everybody else did. And here is why. The Boyd family will tell you, to this day, that this case is not closed." The medical examiner found a healed fracture of Katie's left wrist. Katie had been x-rayed at Calder Memorial in June of 1992 after a softball injury, and that wrist was clean, which means the break happened after the 9th of October, which means she lived 6 to 8 weeks at least, and probably longer. Where she was during those weeks was never established. Not at trial. Not ever. And in that cistern, investigators recovered a leather work glove carrying a second male DNA profile. It is not Everett Cawley. It is not Dale Hupp, whose daughter provided a reference sample. It is not Wade Tillery. It has been run against every database in the country every year since, and it has never matched anyone. The state's position is that it is contamination, or a garage employee, or nothing. Louise Boyd has never accepted that, and neither has her son. And Dale Hupp, who walked into that bay in October of 1992 and raised a camera instead of a telephone, took whatever he was, witness or accomplice or something in between, into a nursing home in Zanesville and out of the world. Calder County closed the file. Louise Boyd still writes a letter every year on the 9th of October. She is 73 now. She still keeps the shoebox. But she also has a grave to stand at, and after 24 years of ambiguous loss, that is not nothing. It is bittersweet, and bittersweet is more than she had. That is the whole difference between grief and limbo. She can bring flowers, she can say her daughter's name out loud, in a place where her daughter is. Danny brings his own kids. The Folgers can is still in the closet, and the $218 is still in it, and Louise has said she will never spend it and never throw it away. This case was solved because one woman did not throw away a coffee can. That is what these stories are really about. Not the monster. The monster was a fire chief in a small Ohio town, and he was trusted for a reason, and that is the hardest lesson in this entire story. It is about the people who keep going. A mother who wrote 23 letters nobody answered. A brother who told his mother himself. A detective who read 4 boxes line by line. A stranger who drove to a sheriff's office with an envelope of drugstore prints because something would not let her let it go. Share this video, not for morbidity, but to create awareness about the thousands of missing persons in this country and the families who are still waiting. Somewhere out there right now is a coffee can on a shelf, an unopened box in a basement, a person who saw something in 1992 and has never said it out loud. Cases like this one are solved by ordinary people deciding not to look away. Leave a like if Katie's story stayed with you, and tell us in the comments what you would want a stranger to do if it were your family. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. Because sometimes, even after 24 years, the truth finds its way up out of the ground, and sometimes miracles do happen.